All right, well, let's get started. Well, thank you everyone for joining me again today. My name is Mike Tabor, and we're going to go over the update, kind of an update on the recent Windows 10 updates that have been going on. Our goal is to kind of share information as we find it here in tech support and share it out to our dealers and so forth. And this is probably a good opportunity. As you know, we do this every Wednesday at 10 o'clock, and next week Michael Gebel will be talking. Let's just go ahead and kind of go over some bullet points that I had set up for today's topics, similar to a couple weeks ago. Keystroke version 8 runs fine on Windows 10. We don't seem to have any problems with the program. The F1 help is installed automatically. You do get prompted. If you answer no to it, you don't get the Windows help files, but you can rerun the setup, or the workstations could rerun setup WS. Today our two topics are the default Windows printers in Windows 10 are set by default to change the default. So as you print from printer, let's say a receipt printer to a laser printer, your default printer will change the default to the laser, and then as you print a receipt, it'll change your default back to the receipt printer. And this causes problems because in Keystroke we have a nice utility that says use the default printer. So sometimes your reports will go to the wrong places, and I'm going to show you some screenshots here in a little bit to kind of go through that. We're also getting a lot of calls about mapping of network drives. This kind of came up. Lisa mentioned earlier that there was some issues. Well, it's very easy to use your mouse to go in and click and map a network drive because if you bring in all brand new machines that are Windows 10, you will have to go in and if you do choose to map a network drive, which we kind of recommend for batch file sake, you do want to map them as administrator. I'll just talk about the administrator process. Keystroke uses a lot of high-end tools. Let's just talk about credit card processing. We actually need the high-level encryption that Microsoft provides to be able to talk between either Keystroke and KeyPay, or nowadays it's with Keystroke and NetEPay. This is a high-end TCP/IP encryption method that's required, so Keystroke needs to be in an environment that it can either run as an administrator or elevate privileges to the administrator. We're finding out a lot of people, and even techs out there that have a lot of experience, even like myself, will go in and click on a computer and click on a share and right-click and select Map Network Drive, and then just say OK, and then they think they're done. But then they're really not done because the mapping doesn't allow for administration privileges to be elevated during the process of Keystroke running or KeyPay running and so forth. But let's first talk about the default Windows printers. Here is a screenshot of Windows 10. I'm on a Windows 7 machine, otherwise I might browse around and show you these things. But one of the settings you're going to want to see and take a look at right away. If you're not familiar with Windows 10, the settings screen is easy to get to. You go down to the lower left, what we'll call the Start button, but it's a little window now. And that window will open up and you'll see Settings. This is a great place to get started. So when you click on Settings, this is usually what you see right here. This is where you can look at your devices. That's what we're going to be looking at here. We're going to actually go to Devices. Update and Security, that's where you're going to set up Windows updates. And there's some settings in there that we talked about last week about if once you update one machine to Windows 10, by default that one machine is going to go out and broadcast itself to everybody on the network and update them all. So kind of be ready for your customers to call and say, hey, I don't know what happened, but when I booted up my computer, I've got Windows 10 now. It's not the biggest deal in the world. Don't be afraid. Just be ready for it. So when we're in the settings, if we click on devices, that's at the top row, second from the left, we would see this next screen. I've scrolled down through my list of printers here, and I wanted to show you the part that says, let Windows manage my default printers. By default, this is turned on. It's a little slider bar. You want to turn that off. Keystroke is very good at understanding what printers are where. But because we've added the functionality to use the default printer, things will be kind of incorrect. I'm going to show you in Keystroke right now. I had my computer switch itself over to a receipt printer because that was the last thing I printed to. So in Keystroke, a couple things you might see that you probably have seen, but this is a quick fix. Shift F12. I'm hoping you can see this screen. Just want to show you, make sure you can see the status screen. The status screen here is showing, there we go, is showing kind of like a receipt format of the screen. So basically you'll see it chopped off. When you see it kind of chopped off, you kind of have to think, oh, it looks like it's trying to print to a receipt printer. And because I was in Windows 10 and I went to print something to a receipt, it went ahead and set that as my default. I'm going to go ahead and clerk into Keystroke here. And I'll be a little bit ahead of the screen refresh, but I'm going to go to Report Manager. Well, at least I think I'm going to go to Report Manager. So let's say I want to do a sales transaction report. I'm just going to do a summary, and I think this is standard tutor data. And there's my report. I'm going to see if it refreshes on your side. There's the report. You're going to say, golly, that doesn't look right. And notice that if you can see at the upper left, I have page 1 of 1. This is a multiple page report. I can click the printer icon, but I can't page through it. I can't see what I'm doing. This is what Windows 10 will do for you when you actually just do an install and don't change the setting. You're going to get your reports and your Shift F12 and everything that was set to your default 8.5 by 11 printer now is going to change over. So there's some background stuff that Keystroke uses to understand this. The fix is rather simple. I'm going to open up my devices and printers here. This right here, when it refreshes, this is my printers. I've actually set this to my Godex printer, and that's what I was printing to, and my default would switch to that. Simple fix. Go to a regular printer, regular 8.5 by 11. If you don't have a regular printer, you usually would have one called like the Microsoft, what do they call it, the XTZ viewer printer or something like that. But anyhow, all you need to do is go here, set as default. Now the printer is set as the default, so Windows uses that, Keystroke uses that for displaying things like reports or Shift F12 and so forth. So let's go back to here. I'm going to go back into Keystroke. I'm going to start this report over here in a second. I'll make sure I don't go too fast. So I'm going to run that same exact report under Sales and Transactions. I'm going to run it for the big date range because we have tutor data in here. And now you're going to see that Keystroke takes care of its business. It looks at how we're going to format this. If we're going to send it to a full-size invoice printer, that's what this one's going to look like. So now we have our page numbers. We can page down. We can see the totals. That's another symptom. People will say, I printed a 20-page report, but there's no totals at the bottom. That's usually because the receipt is kind of like a hanging report, meaning there is no end to it. It's continuous feed. So it never knows when to print the summary. It thinks it's continually printing. So the simple fix there was a couple things. Number one, you want to make sure you change your default printer in Windows back to a full-size printer, but make sure you first change it back to, this is under the settings, and down at the bottom it says let Windows manage my default printer. You're going to turn that off. After you've turned that off, you're going to go into your devices and printers, find your printer. This is a different screenshot I took from another machine, and set it to a full-size printer. If all you have on a machine is a let's say a receipt printer, you will see this Microsoft XPS document writer. It's kind of like a PDF writer, but it's slightly different. You can set the default to that. That's the one on the right here. You can set the default to that. If you only have that printer and your receipt printer, set the default to the XPS printer, and then all your reports in Keystroke will work. There are ways to get around that and Jimmy rig it, but I don't even want to go into those steps. So that's kind of what we're speaking about printers. One big thing we're seeing a lot of. Let's talk about mapping network drives. Most people will come in and they'll find a network share. In this case, I have / SBS1 server, and I've chosen it to be the K drive. And it shows me down here, it says reconnect at sign in. We do want that checked. But here's what most people miss. They don't check the little box underneath this that says connect using a different credentials. What happens is Windows will map the K drive as the current user, but not for everybody on the system. And even if you have a Windows 10 machine, like I have a Windows 10 machine that has just one user, it's called Mike. Actually, the computer name is called Mike HP, but the username is called Mike. If I check this little box that says connect using different credentials, and then I click finish, it does bring up the credentials screen. This is the next screen that I'm showing you here. In here, notice that it says Mike-HP, that is the actual computer name. It shows /administrator. It does not show my username, which is Mike, on this computer. So, and I don't use a password. So there was a day and age where you had to use a password to use this functionality, and a lot of your customers do have passwords, so you will need to know what the passwords are. But all you need to do is come into this second screen here. In my case, leave the password blank, check on remember my credentials, and click OK. What you'll find out here is that, in this case, the K drive will be mapped as administrator, and now it can use the higher level kind of stuff that Keystroke needs to use nowadays, which is TCP/IP connections, Keymail, things like that, if it's trying to send emails out and so forth. It's using some higher level capacity from Windows 10. We used to have the same thing in Windows 8 and Windows 7 when it first came out, especially 64-bit computers. At the bottom of the screenshot, hopefully you can read it, it's not too small. You can always open up an administrator command prompt and type in the net use command, the good old-fashioned way. But a lot of people would say, well, why do you have to use DOS to get Windows 10 to work? You don't. You just need to know these little tricks. So at the bottom, this command that I have printed out here says net space use space k : space the share name, which is the / SBS1 computer name / server, that's the actual share name, and then a space / persistent : yes, that is actually the command that says remember my credentials. At that point, you can open up the K drive and run things like setup WS. You can run the Keymail setup, the KeyPaste setup, digital sign controller, and all those kinds of these programs that now have to write to either the Windows registry, or if they are actually trying to write over the network to, let's say, a NetEPay server. So that was pretty much my explanation for today. I just wanted to get a few bullet points out there on Windows 10. I'd like to open up for any conversation. Anybody has some insight or anything you want to share with us, that'd be great. You can go ahead and talk now. And then next week, before I forget, Michael Gebb will be talking about any upcoming new stuff with Keystroke version 8. Oh, and I do see a note here. Somebody said if I use the net use command, you might have to use the /user : username with the the net use command. And it's actually, I think it's /user : username / password : password if you are using passwords. But thank you for that input. That was for someone that's not on the mic. Great, I got a quiet crowd. Does anyone else have any questions for today? That's never a bad sign. Well, call me or call us if you have any questions on Windows 10. I said earlier, don't be afraid to update because it's going to happen one way or the other. I think there is a July 28th or 27th is a deadline for the free updates, so people are going to be calling you to get there. Remember, though, that Windows 10 is a higher-end operating system. Don't try to use your old computers that have old XP memory and old CPUs in them and try to update them to Windows 10, even if you reformat them and start over. I think, if you use 4 gigabytes of RAM or more in a fast, new, last 5 years CPU, you should have no problems with Windows 10. Every one of our technicians here in the office has a Windows 10 machine on their desk, so everyone has 2 machines, usually Windows 7 and 10. Some people have some other options, but we're not afraid to use them, and it seems to be working well. Great. If there's no more questions, I'll go ahead and end our meeting today. Thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.